Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch review, and today we're going to take a look at the Steel Submariner reference 114060, aka the no date. So if we cast back in time to 1953 or around the 1950s, there was a lot of innovation. There was a lot of innovation in diving, and a lot of people were trying to achieve the highest or greatest depth dives possible using submarines and also free diving. And also Rolex, a few years before this, had developed watches that were able to dive to great depths as well. But it was around this point in time where Rolex made a decision, the early 50s, made a decision to try and develop a watch for professional divers. They wanted to develop a watch that had a really high water resistance that could dive to very great depths of 100 to 200 meter depth and be able to withstand that sort of pressure, but also to be able to be used on a daily basis as well. There was big demand in the watch industry from customers and clients for a watch that was a bit more hard wearing, but still a luxury timepiece that kept really good time, because a lot of the watches around that time were more dress watch style. They're a bit more delicate and you can't necessarily wear them when you're playing sport. So Rolex saw that gap in the market. They saw the demand for a harder wearing, tough sports watch, and also a gap in the diving market. And in 1953, a guy called Auguste Piccard was developing a submarine to go diving to very, very deep depths. And he achieved 2 dives in 1953. But one of them was very interesting in the watchmaking industry because Rolex contacted him, and he was also Swiss as well. Obviously, Rolex is a Swiss brand. And Rolex contacted him and said, hey, when you take your submarine down to your next dive, can we strap a watch to the side of the submarine on the outside? And then when you resurface again, the world will see, obviously, that this is a really hardy watch. And he said, yes, of course. So towards the end of 1953, Auguste did his second dive of the year, and that one was over 3,000 meter dive depth, which was incredible. And Rolex strapped a deep sea special watch that they developed to the side of the submarine. And sure enough, when it rose to the surface of the ocean again, the watch was still working and ticking away. And it was Rolex's way of saying to the world, hey, look at us, we can create a watch that can go down to depths deeper than 3,000 meters. And they also said at that same time, we are developing a watch that the general public can use as well. That's not as crazy as this one, but still is incredibly competent when it comes to diving. So in 1954, sure enough, at Basel Fair, they released a Submariner, or the watch they called the Submariner, but it wasn't initially called the Submariner at that point. They named it on the advertising as Submariner, but the watch didn't actually say Submariner on the dial yet. It was just a plain dial. And this watch featured, well, there was actually 3 variations they released in 1954. And one of them featured a water resistance to 100 meters. In fact, two of the variations, 2 of the references, both those references were 6204 and 6205. And both of those initially, when they were released, featured a water resistance of 100 meters. But the 6205, I believe, was increased to 180 meters later on that year. But there was a more professional dive watch that was released, which is the 6200, and that had a water resistance of 200 meters. And these first watches, like I said, didn't feature Submariner on the dial. They also didn't feature a date window. It was just a pure time-only watch with a rotating bezel for divers to measure how long they are diving for, and also to measure stops for their ascent. The public absolutely loved this watch when it came out. It was a brilliant option for everyone in terms of just a more rugged watch for everyday use, but also professionals really found it a cool watch. And also a lot of the naval forces around the world, armies, took on this watch, military services from different countries, and they used this watch as part of their instruments for their divers in the Navy, in the Marines, etc., etc. So skip a few years on to 1959, Rolex implemented crown guards on the case, and that was to protect the crown, obviously, because before the crown was quite open, and I think it caused issues with people knocking it and above or below water. It was originally, the case originally was more of like a dress watch style in a way, but those crown guards allowed the crown to be a little bit more protected and stop things from knocking the crown and potentially ruining the watch if you're underwater. Another thing they changed in 1959 was the original Submariners were 36mm case size, and they changed the newer Submariners to a 40mm case size. So a bigger case, and obviously those crown guards increased the size of the case as well, and it made the watch a little bit more legible for people diving. Skip another few years on to 1966, we saw the introduction of the date variation of the Submariner, and that watch was extremely popular, and Rolex released that watch because there were people who were just buying this watch, as I mentioned before, because it was a bit more rugged and a better option for everyday wear, and also a better sports watch than what else was available on the market. So it wasn't really just divers that were buying this watch, it was actually a lot of just normal professional people, people in the city that were buying this watch. And so Rolex wanted to make that watch a little bit more appropriate for those people, so they added the date function, and that made it extremely popular. People all around the world were buying that. Again, not just divers. Another couple of years later, in 1969, Rolex released the first gold version of this watch, or precious metal version. Again, kind of nod to the fact that so many people were buying these that weren't anything to do with diving. Because obviously if you're a diver, you're not going to need a gold watch, that's just pretty pointless. Steel was the perfect metal for them to be using. So yeah, that was a watch that meant that people who really enjoyed the Submariner wanted to have something a bit more dressy or a bit more special, had the option of then a precious metal version. Skip another few years on to 1979, we saw the introduction of the sapphire crystal or glass to the watch, which was obviously much more harder wearing, much more solid, thicker as well, and also it was very scratch resistant. But the biggest advantage that the sapphire crystal added to the watch was the fact that Rolex was able to increase the water resistance from 200 meters to 300 meters due to the extra structural rigidity that the sapphire crystal added to the watch. And then we skip on to 2009, and there were a few different changes between 1979 and 2009. But 2009 was the next main event, and that was when we saw the introduction of the new super case, which is what we are looking at today. That same larger, wider lugs, the bigger case overall, the bigger bezel, but the biggest change, or one of the most important changes on that watch, was the ceramic bezel. And the watch that was released in 2009 was actually the 116613LB, which is the bimetal blue version of the Submariner. And then later on, over the next few years after that, there was the steel versions, the Smurf, and the gold, precious metal versions released. But the one that we're looking at here today, the 114060, was released in 2012, and that also featured obviously the updated, bigger super case, ceramic bezel, and glide lock, and a few other changes on the watch. Okay, so that concludes the basic history of the Submariner. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the date version of the Submariner and that history, then go check out my review on that 116610 reference. So on to the 114060 reference, and we're going to look at some of the features of this watch. So as always, starting with the clasp, this watch has a glide lock clasp, and that is a brilliant invention, one of my favorite features of this Submariner. And Rolex brought out this clasp again with divers in mind. So that meant that divers could wear this watch during the day, with a normal suit or whatever they wanted to wear it with, just on their bare wrist. Or they could wear it over the top of a dive suit, like a thick dive suit, a neoprene suit. And it meant that the diver could wear this watch without having to change the bracelet and add and change links. They wanted to make it a really easy way for divers to be able to adjust the size of the bracelet. So they invented this glide lock clasp, and it basically means that you can change the size of the bracelet by quite a significant amount, and it does it in 2mm increments. And there's sort of ridges inside the clasp you can lock the clasp into. I owned the 116610, the date version of this watch, and I used this glide lock clasp regularly. It was such a useful feature on the watch to be able to adjust the size of the watch really quickly. I found it a really great feature, especially in the summer when your wrist expands and contracts quite a lot. That is a great feature to have on a bracelet as well, because usually bracelets you can't really do that. The size you get with a bracelet is the size you get. You can't really change it. The closest to this that I can think of is, from Rolex, that is the Easy Link, which is a 5mm extension you can put on your bracelet by unlooping the bracelet at a certain point. but it doesn't have the range of adjustability and the finer increments that you can adjust it. So yeah, it's a great feature, not just for divers. It's actually just really useful for everyday wear anyway. It is much bigger than the standard Oyster clasp, and I found that a little bit irritating. I didn't really wear the watch that much on a bracelet anyway, so I didn't find it too much of an issue, obviously, but the larger size of the clasp means it's much more of a scratch magnet. It does also protrude quite a lot from the wrist. So yeah, that is one issue with having this sort of size of clasp, but you really do feel because of that it's much more of a utility watch, much more of a tool than like the Oyster clasps. Moving on to the bracelet, we've got a standard Oyster bracelet here with all brushed links. It's my favorite variation of the Oyster bracelet. I really like brushed links. I think they look better than the polished links personally, purely because I like the more stealthy, subtle utility look of full brushed links. I also prefer the effect of a brushed watch anyway. I find that shiny, polished center links can look a little bit too blingy and a little bit too shiny for my personal taste. Which is why I'd always choose a Submariner over a GMT. Moving on to the case, we've got a real iconic case here, the Super case from Rolex. This is such an icon in the collection and will be for many, many years. I love the bigger squat stance that Super cases have, those wider lugs, the bigger bezel, and obviously we've got our ceramic bezel as well and our big crown guards. I love the detail of the crown guards being polished as well, and obviously we've got polished sides to the case. Yeah, overall it's just a really cool looking watch. It looks amazing on the wrist as well. Great wrist presence with this bigger, newer style case. As I mentioned, ceramic bezel, and that's great because it's not going to fade over time like the older bezels do. And it also is very, very scratch resistant. It's not totally scratch resistant, but it should last longer than the older versions, and it should look newer for much longer. The bezel features these ridged edges, and that means that divers, when they're wearing gloves, when they're on the boat and they're about to dive into the water and begin their dive, are able to quickly twizzle around the bezel, set it to the time they're diving in, and without kind of their gloves slipping off or having to take off their gloves. So those ridges just add a little bit of extra grip, which is obviously important when you're when you're working and you need to have good grip on a watch when you're wearing gloves. The markers and the numbers on the bezel are platinum inlaid, which means that area is channeled out of the ceramic during the process and then filled with platinum, and it just means that they're super legible and bright, but also they're not going to tarnish and wear out over time. Platinum is an extremely hardy material. And at 12 o'clock, at this current time when you see the watch on the screen, we have the lume and our little triangle, which means you set that time for when your dive begins. Obviously that swivels around so it can be anywhere on the dial. And the bezel is unidirectional, and that means it only goes one direction. And Rolex released that feature in 1981, and it basically means that you can't extend your dive by accident by accidentally knocking the watch. It means you can only shorten your dive, which is obviously a really good safety feature, especially if you're relying just on this watch for how much time you have left in your oxygen tanks. If you accidentally knock the watch and you end up spending too much time underwater, then that could be a very dangerous situation to be in. Moving now onto the dial, we've got these amazing maxi markers, the iconic Mercedes hands, our arrow, or like a pencil minutes hand. But the immediate thing you'll notice about this watch versus the more common date version is the symmetry on this dial is very pure and perfect. Because we don't have that date window at 3 o'clock, we've got a very nice, clean looking dial. We also don't have a bubble, a cyclops bubble, to enlarge or magnify the date. So in terms of the watch crystal, it's a very flat and clean looking piece. In a weird way, it does actually look a little bit larger because there's less going on in the dial. And automatically, to me, as a previous owner of the date version, when I look at this watch, it almost looked like there's something missing on the watch, or there's like a gap towards the right hand side, but it does look very, very balanced and pure. I really like this watch. And that brings me on to whether or not I'd own this watch. I think it puts me in a unique position, having owned the date version, to be able to comment on this one too. Personally, I would definitely own this watch. I appreciate the fact that this is true and pure to the original Submariner, without the date, and this is the most true to the older version. I love the fact that it's very much a utility watch. This watch is very much a tool. but at the same time, it's just a stunning design. It's a beautiful watch to wear every single day as well. They're incredibly reliable watch and very, very hardy watches, the Submariners. And the mad thing is, it's actually the most affordable Submariner in the whole collection, which I just think is amazing because it's the truest one. For me, as the title of this video says, I think this is arguably the ultimate Submariner because it is so true and pure to the original version. And for me, it's one of my favorite Submariners in the whole collection. I really only like the steel ones anyway. It is an absolute classic and will be for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's just an iconic watch. If you can get one at retail price at £5,450 here in the UK, that is an absolute bargain. It's just a brilliant watch for that price. I think there's so much history behind this watch, you absolutely cannot go wrong. It's a very, very cool piece, and you're very lucky to own one of these if you do own one. Thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think of this reference 114060. Would you own the no date version or would you own the date version? Would you maybe own the bimetal version? Let us know what you think of this no date Submariner. If you're interested in this Submariner or any of the other Submariners or any other the Rolexes in the Rolex collection, let us know. Don't hesitate to contact us. Our contact details are down in the description. We'd be happy to assist you in sourcing this timepiece for you. That's part of the service we offer here at Bijou Diamond Jewellery.